Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, likes and dislikes. Guy Tell brings a deep and contemplative approach to landscape photography, shaped by decades of creative exploration and a profound relationship with the high deserts of the Colorado Plateau. In this episode, he reflects on his belief that photography is a medium for self-expression rather than mere documentation. He discusses how his images serve as visual metaphors, echoes of thoughts, feelings, and his personal connection to wild places. Guy talks about his evolution as an artist and writer, the value of solitude, and how living simply allows him to pursue a meaningful life rooted in creativity. He shares thoughts on navigating technology's influence on art, the importance of creative risk-taking, and how to overcome periods of stagnation. With over 40 years of experience, his perspective offers insight not only into photography, but also into how one might align their livelihood with deeper personal values. This episode invites listeners to rethink the purpose of their creative work and the role of landscape photography as an emotional and philosophical practice. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Guy. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I'd like to talk to you today. I don't want to go back into history, and I know you've covered that in other podcasts, and if people want to listen to your life story, they can do that elsewhere. But I do want to talk to you about why you're a landscape photographer and what it is about photography that made you go, okay, this is what I want to do with my life.
I guess I should start with the term landscape photographer. For me, it's much more about the landscape than about the photography. I've been a very avid naturalist since my earliest days. I'm also a reclusive introvert. I love spending time on my own outside. So in terms of subject matter or things that I want to express in my work, that's the easiest part. Those are the things that I love. It's being out there. Photography has been an accident for me. Back in my teenage years, I borrowed my father's camera and I just went out hiking like I usually did. And I just became fascinated. Just the experience of it was just so captivating for me that I absolutely loved it. And his camera was an old Minolta with a fixed 35 millimeter lens, so it was very limiting. And so once I started getting serious, I started saving money, and eventually I bought my own camera. It was a Nikon F3 at the time, which I loved. I kind of went downhill from there. It's more than 40 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah, I guess. Having that experience of 40 odd years, is there anything in your career that you would change, or have you just gone the path that makes sense to you on the way through?
That's hard to say, mainly because I don't think of my life in those terms. I've never been a planner. I've always tried to find opportunities, find things that challenge me and interest me, and try to pursue them to the best of my ability. And that made for a very interesting, not always easy life path. I have not always been a professional photographer. I've had a career in information technology and IT.
Okay.
But looking back, of course, if I could go back and nitpick and rearrange my life story, there's probably some parts of it that I would change and then take out and replace. But in terms of what I knew at the time, what I wanted to do at the time, I feel like for the most part, I've pursued my opportunities and I've made the best use of my time.
Yeah, nice. I know another big part of your life is writing. Where did that start, and what role do you see that has in conjunction with your photography?
That has started before photography for me. When I was in school, taking my first writing class, it was something that, to my surprise, other people struggle with, but I just took to it. I just loved doing it, and I started journaling, and I started writing, and I've always been an avid reader since my young childhood. So it fascinated me that I could actually write, and the idea that I could actually write books someday, it was just captivating for me. So I've been writing, journaling, essaying for longer than I have been involved in photography. That's always been a passion for me. And in one of my books, I wrote an essay about how the different roles that photography and writing play in my life, in my creativity. And I think they're fairly complementary, where with photography, I can engage and explore things outside of me, relate to things outside of me. Writing is more inward facing, where I try to dredge things out of my own mind to put into writing. So it's a different media, just look in different direction, allow me to explore myself and my world in different ways.
Yeah. It's obvious that creativity has been a big part of your career, and I'm really interested in how people actually get motivated to create. What is it that inspires you? Is it people? Is it places? Is it objects? What inspires you?
I think it's mostly curiosity. If you read some scientific studies of creativity, the one personality traits that's most closely correlated with creativity is called openness to experience.
Uh-huh.
That's just pretty much being able to, or able and willing to engage with the world, to be interested in things, to pursue new things, to not just be stuck in a rut, or to not just pursue templates. And so, yeah, for me, that's always been fascinating. I've always wanted to explore and to find out and to experience and to try things. And so I guess creativity has been a natural thing for me. I've never been very tempted to go out and imitate other people or copy what other people are doing. It was fascinating to me that I could do it, and I wanted to see what I could do for myself. So creativity was a natural way for me to pursue photography and really anything else. Yeah, the flip side of that is looking at a lot of photography out there. I think one of the greatest challenges that photography has as a medium, especially as a medium for artistic expression, is a very profound lack of creativity. Most photographers go to the same
Mm,
places, photograph the same things in the same style, process in the same ways. There's a lot of sameness out there.
very much.
And what I've tried to do in my teaching, in my workshop, in my writing, is I try to nudge people to explore creatively, to take creative risks, and not be afraid to fail, to experiment, to try to dredge something out of themselves, to try to express something out of their own experience, their own mind, their own personality, and try to put that into their photographs. And I have found that to be the most rewarding, obviously very challenging, but the most rewarding way to pursue photography, where we're just traveling to a known place according to a plan and photographing the thing that I've knew I would photograph and coming back with a trophy. That to me, it never felt like a great accomplishment. The experience
Yeah,
is enjoyable, probably the travel enjoyable, being with people is enjoyable, seeing interesting places enjoyable. But in terms of a creative endeavor, in terms of a creative project, it just for me, it just didn't check that box. It's just the plan was carried out. The mission was successful. And that's not how I think about photography. Photography for me is a way of just, I want to be open to the world. And every now and then something inspires me, something interests me, fascinates me. And I want to try to express some of that in a photograph. That is a much more interesting way for me to practice photography.
interesting. You've opened up a number of themes there that I want to explore in a little bit more depth. We'll come back to the one about the photography's place in society and how photography, as you said, can be very samey. But let's park that for a bit. I want to talk a little bit about your own creative challenges and how you've
Mhm.
gone about, I guess, satisfying those. You said that you are looking to challenge yourself. In what ways do you try to do that? And what ways do you try to experiment with both technique, but also in looking at how you're seeing the world?
Obviously, that's evolved over the years. Initially,
Sure.
you don't have technical mastery, then the challenges are technical. But once you get to a point where you can make the camera do what it can do for you, where you end up start just looking at the world and then trying to find compositions that are at first visually appealing. And then you up the bar even more and you try to find things that are not just visually appealing, but also expressive, that actually express something about your mood and then your feelings, your emotions, your experience, your state of mind at the time. And so for me, it's not just finding challenges, but also once I've gotten to a point where I've met those challenges, I try to go further. I try to push the envelope a little bit further. And to me, that's what keeps it interesting. If you're familiar with the effect of flow, was described by a psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He talks about something
Mhm.
called the flow channel, and the flow channel is a balance between your skill level and the difficulty of the task. So, low skill, you're within the channel pretty early because everything is challenging. But once you
Yeah.
gain enough technical skills, once you have enough experience, you have to find greater and greater difficulties, greater and greater challenges to stay within that flow channel, to challenge yourself enough that whatever you're doing consumes your cognitive resources to a point where you're just all your attention is invested in what you're doing. So I guess for me, that's you talk about challenges. I can't say that X has been challenging or Y has been challenging. It's just been an evolution. I think for me, if I had to characterize it at a greater sense, what the greatest challenge for me is, for me, I've always lived and carried myself and then been out in the world wanting to pursue experiences, wanting to pursue meaningful, interesting experiences. So, first of all, finding a way to integrate photography into that, and then finding a way for photography to enhance those experiences. So, when I'm out there, when I'm having a meaningful experience, when I see something that's inspiring or fascinating to me, not just record it, but actually bring in photography as a way to deepen and make the experience more complex, find a way to express it in photographs, find novel ways to think about it photographically, visually. And it's an ongoing challenge. The more I do, the greater the challenge that I set for myself is the next time.
Yeah. I think what you saying there in terms of that emotional or I guess feeling of a connection both with the place but also the specific subject within that place is really important. How do you, I guess, what techniques are you using or what things are you trying to do when you're trying to pull those emotions out? Is it partly about what you're feeling at the time, or is it more about how you're reacting to the landscape that you're in?
A big part of it is not intuitive, is actually recognizing what it is that you're feeling and want to express. And that's a direct result of practicing mindfulness.
Mm.
Mindfulness is about bringing your conscious attention to your experience in real time, realizing what it is that you're feeling, what thoughts are coming up in your, not just things outside of you, but what thoughts are bubbling up in your head, what feelings are going on inside you. And then once you become conscious of those things, which it's surprisingly most people are not most of the time, but once you become conscious of those things, then finding the things in your environment, visual cues that might connect with those, then it becomes more of a creative challenge. But I think first, just you're in a place, and for most people, you encounter something beautiful, and you just go, "Wow, what does wow mean?"
Yeah.
What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What else is happening in your life that's contributing to how you're feeling and how you're interpreting things, and why this particular thing caught your attention? Those are things that for most people are subconscious, and I think part
Mhm.
of mindfulness is making them conscious, and the other part of that is eliminating distraction. So if you're worried about other things, if there's other people around you that are distracting your attention, if you have something coming up in the future, if you're thinking about something that you've done in the past that you're regretting, all those things will take attention away from that creative act, from that experience of the moment. And so corralling your attention into what you're doing, into that creative challenge that's ahead of you, so that you're not just experiencing and recognizing what you're experiencing, but actually completely mindful of all the things in your environment. We're consciously aware of just a tiny fraction of what's in front of our eyes, even though we
So,
walk around with this certainty that if something happens in front of my eye, for sure I'm going to see it and notice it. There's going to be an obvious photograph. That's a fallacy. If you sit down and pay attention and empty your mind and try to pay attention to every tiny little detail and nuance and where the light is coming from and all the colors and lines and shapes and visual elements that you have to work with, you'll realize you have a very rich environment almost anywhere that you are. If you
yeah.
only take the time to make yourself conscious of it and to think about how you can use it in a visual composition. So, yeah, I think for me, that's a lot of things that tie together into it's not just photography, it's not just going to pretty places and making pretty pictures of them, but it's a very complex, multidimensional experience.
You touched on something that a lot of photographers talk about, particularly landscape photographers, is taking your time and slowing down. The very act of doing that, both in your mind, taking away those things that have been cluttering your mind, whether it's the drive to the location or the busy work schedule that you've had, etc. I think one of the key things for photographers is being able to actually stop thinking about all of the other stuff that's in the background, concentrating on
Mhm.
exactly what it is that you're doing, not just technique with the gear and setting up the composition, but that whole complete experience of experiencing the location that you're in, I think is very key. And it really resonates with me with and my photography, but also workshop experience where I've both been on workshops, but also holding workshops, educating. And I think that mindfulness practice is a massive part of being able to be creative and be able to recognize what's going on in the landscape that you can then portray that in your compositions and in your photography.
Absolutely.
How do you connect with a place before you photograph it? How long is it before the camera comes out of the bag? Is it an immediate,
That,
oh my
that
God, that's it, I've got to take that? Or is it something that takes a little bit more time?
Sometimes it is, but most often it isn't. And I work deliberately in a fairly limited geography. I work in a geography that I'm very familiar with, places that I know as well as anyone. I know the names of the plants and the animals. I know
Yep.
exactly the weather patterns, and I know exactly what's going to happen when the wind does something, what happens when there's certain circumstances in the different seasons, different times of the day, how the light would react. So this familiarity gives me a lot of intuition about what might be photogenic where. Although making photographs is not my primary goal in going out, I'm out practically every day. I
Sure.
live almost outside. I can walk out my door and be quote unquote in nature. Within minutes, I can be in canyons and forests and a lot of
Nice.
beautiful scenery. And I do that for my own edification. A lot of times I don't touch the camera. But so this familiarity comes from a lot of years of communing with this place. This is my favorite place in the world. I have a relationship with this place, and a lot of personal history in this place. So my stories obviously become more complex because for me, it's not just about rounding a corner and oh my God, this is happening in the light. It's not. It's not like that. It's going on.
Yeah.
There's something interesting, and I wonder if this, and I wonder if that. And I might want to try to look at this from here. I might try to come back in an hour when the light's over there. So it's a more nuanced process for me than just going out and just being passive and waiting for things to hit me. It's when I feel inspired, I'm mindful of things that I recognize that I'm familiar with, that I know how to work.
Is there a specific moment that you remember where things didn't quite go as planned, but something unforgettable still emerged? And I guess what first drew you to that spot? And then,
That's a trick question for me because I deliberately avoid planning. I just go.
sure,
So
okay,
nothing ever goes according to plan because there's no plan. The plan is to be out.
fair enough.
Yeah, but yeah, every now and then, of course, out in nature, I can't predict anything. I can't predict a lot of things, and every now and then, something would catch me by surprise. But it's usually not something photographic. I've had to think of a. Well, I was walking down a canyon once, a fairly narrow canyon, and I rounded the corner, and I hear some noise ahead of me. And as soon as I walk around, there's a bighorn sheep ram. There are these big rams with big
Yep.
rounded horns. And he's not very far from me, and he's standing and looking at me. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I just stood still because I didn't want to scare it. And I could see that he was nervous, and I didn't know why it was nervous. It was just the two of us there. It was plenty of distance. And suddenly it lowered its head and started charging me. And oops. It turns out that where he was standing, he could not get out. His only way to get out was to
Couldn't
run
back
right by
off.
me and go up over my head on a little hill. But it scared the bejesus out of me when it was running toward me because I didn't have too much room to go anyway. But so those are the kind of things that I would say catch me by surprise, and maybe not the things that I expect, but I welcome them. I love surprises like that. As long as I get to walk away, then everything's good.
You talked a little bit about where you live and the fact that you've got intimate knowledge of both the place, but also the flora and fauna there. What drew you first there to go and settle down there, first off, but also to get out into nature in that place?
It's actually an interesting story. I almost hesitate to say I was born and grew up in Israel, and I hope people listening, please don't associate that with any assumption about any political thoughts that I might have. I left for a reason. But when I was serving my mandatory, I guess I would call it service, I would use other words for it. We were stationed out on the Golan Heights, and the military brought in some care packages and some books for us to read. And one of those books happened to be a book by an author named Edward Abbey called
Okay.
Desert Solitaire. And it was a book about his time as a ranger in what was then Arches National Monument. Today it's National Park outside of Moab back in the 50s. And I was just fascinated by his descriptions of this landscape. It just sounded incredible. And also I was in a fairly very bad state of mind in the military. That was not a great time in my life. I am not the kind of person who would thrive in a military environment. So I just really sunk into that book. I just escaped into this world of this beautiful desert landscape. And then years later, in the mid 90s, I was studying and teaching at the Tel Aviv University. And that was right around this new invention came out. Maybe you heard of it. It was called the internet. And that might be big someday. And,
Yeah.
anyway, I was fascinated by that. And I was working part-time at the computer center with the people at the computer center. I had a pretty good experience with internet technologies. And suddenly my skills were very much in demand. And I got hired by a company that wanted to open an office in Silicon Valley in California. And they brought me out there and I worked on the project, and they offered me a permanent job, which it was obvious to me that I wanted to stay. And then I had a little bit of time, and I remember that book by Edward Abbey, and I thought I'm within driving distance of this desert landscape. I should go look at it in person and just see those places that I only read about. And There aren't many moments in my life that I remember with that much clarity, but I remember just arriving in this really remote part of Utah. Obviously I went camping. I don't stay in motels. I took the car and just went out on a dirt road, and I just stepped out of the car. And the only way I can explain it is I felt like I've returned to a place that I've left a long time ago. But
Sure.
obviously I've never been there before, but everything just felt so familiar. The
Wow.
smells and the sounds and the light and the texture. And it was like, this is my home. And it was a very overwhelming feeling. And so after that, almost every time I came out to the canyon country, to Utah, to this area called the Colorado Plateau, and explored more and more of it. I'm not very prone to going to national parks and popular places. So I just find a map, find an interesting spot on it, find a place to park and start walking. And so I spent a lot of days or spending a lot of time here. And eventually it just became clear to me I just had to live here. I just had to be a part of it. And I took a few more years, but eventually it happened.
Nice. Pardon me. I guess in coming there, one of the things that I've noticed with some photographers, not all, but where they live and the environment that they photograph has influenced both what they photograph, obviously, but also how they photograph. And I'm interested in whether or not where you are now in Colorado has had that same effect on your work.
I'm actually in Utah. So
Oh,
the
sorry.
area is called the area is called the Colorado Plateau, which is the
Right.
geographic region that's the drainage of the Colorado River. So it's named after the Colorado River. But yeah, absolutely. The most significant parts of my life have unfolded in this geography and in a lot of different ways, both my personal life and then my outdoor life and all my discoveries of myself, my aging here. Everything is tied together. And since I've always had this streak of wanting to express something of my connection with the place, with my subjects and my photographs, then yeah, I would say the two are inseparable. I don't know that I could necessarily tell you exactly this image was created because I have this relationship with that particular place, but it's just the way that it inspires me. I like paying attention to details. I like paying attention to nuances. And we mentioned I like being mindful in the landscape. Most people come to Utah to photograph the big iconic views, but for me, there's so much more here than just that. It's just everything is beautiful to me. The wildlife, the animals, the seasons, the light, the geography, the weather. So everything it just feels like this is a big part of my life. This is my life reflected in the geography. And that's what I try to express in my work. So there is definitely that relationship.
Yeah, you can certainly see it in your work. It
Thank you.
comes through in spades. How do you define success in your photography? What is success to you in your photography?
I guess I would start from a larger perspective and maybe narrow it down to photography. For me, success means living a meaningful, interesting life.
Sure.
And that's a theme that runs through everything that I have a choice about is I try to veer through that. I abhor boredom. I abhor wasting time, love finding things that are interesting and fascinating to me. And so coming down to photography, if the experiences that lead to my photographs are satisfying, and if
Mm.
I've found sufficient expression in the photograph, if only to myself. Obviously, nobody can relate to the fullness of my experience here without actually being me, without relating to this place like I do.
Sure.
Then I feel I've been successful when I look at a photograph maybe years later and I can just project myself into that moment. And it's like, I remember exactly that experience. That's
Nice.
my definition of success. There's also the more prosaic being a professional photographer. I need to also earn a living, and that's a factor of success. But in the greater sense, in terms of what makes me feel that I've succeeded creatively, artistically, it's that I'm able to look at my work years later
Mm.
and just relive that moment and that experience and the thoughts that I've had.
Sure. I want to move back to what we talked about earlier in that, I guess, where photography is in society and where you see some of the problems that have arisen both from the rise of social media, because you've had your career through that period prior to social media even existing through to where we are now. Obviously, a lot's changed, some for the good, some for the bad. What's your opinion of where photography is in the world?
Boy, that's a big question. Yeah, I suppose I've been fortunate to have lived through great transition through the technological revolution, and I am literally a member of the last generation to have known life without the internet, without gadgets, without cell phones.
Yeah.
I remember coming home from school and doing my homework and being told to go play outside.
Yes.
That's what you do, and you play outside until you hear somebody calling you to come back home because you don't want to come home.
No, that's right.
So yeah, that was a very different way of life. And I've also had a career in technology. So I've had a front seat to a lot of these developments. I understood a lot of what was happening and how it was happening. It was very interesting. Yeah, technology has for sure revolutionized and in a sense democratized a lot of photography. There are a lot more people practicing photography today. It
Sure.
has always been a very popular hobby, but definitely not to the same extent. Photography has also and technology have also had a huge impact on the places that I like to work. I remember in the 90s going out into places out here in the desert, and I could just pretty much toss a tent anywhere and not see anyone for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of places now where you just can't do that. They're just people all the time. And a lot of
Mm.
places have been impacted negatively by increased visitation. As far as photography, because it has become more accessible, which obviously has its advantages, there's also a lot more of it. So that has changed the business of it. It used to be that if you had great photographs from a certain geography, you were usually part of a handful of people there wasn't that much competition. You could become pretty well
Sure.
known for your own take on these places. You could probably find venues to publish them, and that's much harder today. And it's strange for me now when younger people come and ask me, I want to become a professional photographer like you. What do I need to do? And to be honest, I don't know. If I was starting today, the path that I took is no longer available. And I
Yeah.
don't know, starting today, where you have to be social media and constantly engage with people and constantly posting and constantly on.
Well,
You
it's
know,
more than just photography as well. You've got to be doing
oh,
video
absolutely.
just to be seen.
Absolutely. And I don't know that it would have even appealed to me as a profession if that's what it was about. I'm glad that I was able to establish myself before that happened and to have at least gotten the bulk of my career done writing that reputation. So I don't have to be as visible now because that's just very incompatible with my personality. Yeah, actually, a few years ago, I was starting to become what I felt was too famous. People, I lived in a small desert town, and I've had people coming to town and asking other people where I lived and knock on my door. And it made me extremely uncomfortable. And I
Wow.
decided to actually scale back my public activities because I didn't want to become more famous than that. I didn't want people chasing me around. So, yeah, there's definitely been transitions both in the world, in my life, and obviously in photography too. It's been interesting to witness and to have been a part of it, but I am certainly very grateful that I got into photography when I did and that I got to experience these places when I did. A lot of things that I got to see and experience and do and then be successful at are no longer possible, no longer exist.
Mm. You, pardon me. You mentioned the sameness of a lot of photography these days. And in part, that is because of social media and people, as you say, trying to collect iconic locations, for want of a better way of saying it. But how do you change people's perceptions in regard to that? And I don't know that there is a good answer for it, but I'm just interested in how you think that sort of photography, I guess, probably will always be with us from now on. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on how you would, if you were sitting down with a photography that was out chasing those sorts of things, how you would change their mind.
I don't know that I would be successful, but that's something that I actually have done professionally teaching workshops here
Sure.
for 20 some years. That's exactly what I do is I try to get people to think more creatively and less in templates and about icons. And I've given this a lot of thought. And I think at the end of the day, the best thing that I have is to lead by example. This
Yeah.
is how I live. This is how I work. These are my reasons for doing it. And I put it in my writings, in my essays, in my magazine articles, in my books, in my teaching materials. It's all focused on creativity and personal expression and trying to urge people to think beyond the templates, beyond the icons, beyond just doing what everybody else is doing. Now that I would say I'm semi-retired, that I'm no longer teaching regularly, I can look back and with some humility, if I had to quantify what percentage of people that I have tried to mentor or that I've tried to guide that way, have actually implemented that, it, the percentage would be embarrassingly very small.
Yeah,
Even people that do respond to it in the moment and that do accept the explanation and that are excited to try it very often fall back to their old ways. There's just so much peer pressure, and not just that, but life has become so hectic. People spend so much time doing so many things. Their attention is spread so thin, and creative work takes risks, not guaranteed, sometimes fails, not always popular, not always understood, not as productive. And for people that just want to maintain that fast pace, especially on social media, I want to put an image up and I want as many people to see it and like it and share it. And then you have to appeal to low common denominators. You're limited by how complex it can be, by how novel it can be, by how unusual it can be, by how much you depart from the sanctioned right and wrong things to do. And I think that those are extremely unfortunate things, especially in art. Art should be as liberal as anything. Even if you're not a liberally minded person, art should be liberal. Art is the one thing where people should be free to express themselves in any
absolutely.
way that they want. And I think there's so much pressure in the opposite direction that it's unfortunate. And like I said, the best I can do is just demonstrate how I do it and why I do it and how it works for me and how it's made my life richer. I have and have had a pretty incredible, very interesting, very diverse life. And I'm now at the point where I pretty much got to a point in my life where I can get up in the morning and decide every day, where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Do I want to
Nice.
write? Do I want to photograph? Do I want to go for a hike? Do I want to go to some scenic canyon? Every single day, I have nothing, and I can still make my modest ends meet. And if that's not something that you aspire to, then I'm not sure I have much to teach you. But that's been something that my whole life I've wanted to do and have strived to get to, and I'm very proud that I've managed to get there.
We've talked a little bit about how you've taught. What has photography taught you about the world?
I think photography had taught me mindfulness before I knew what mindfulness was. Just this capability, this capacity, this mode of just examining things in detail through a finder and then arranging things. And you have to be conscious of so many different things to create a successful image. If you're not following templates, if you want to create original images, that it forces you into a mindful mindset, and then you start to realize the benefits of it. And then once I learned about mindfulness, once I learned about attention, once I learned about some of the science behind it, it all fell into place for me. So I've definitely learned mindfulness from photography, where when I'm out, I'm not in a rush to get anywhere, I'm not in a rush to do anything, I don't have a destination, I don't have a plan, I just want to be out in a place that inspires me and fascinates me and just open myself up to see what I might find. And yeah, it has made my life a lot richer. And when I look at it, even from an even broader perspective, photography has liberated me from the career driven life. Photography has liberated me from the need to live in a city. I don't like living in cities. I can live in a small rural place all by myself.
Mm.
Photography has introduced me to people that are today my closest friends. So I've gained a lot from photography. There's no doubt.
Nice. What's one moment in your career that you've truly felt awe and I guess is one of your most memorable shoots?
I would say I'm very fortunate to experience that fairly regularly,
Good.
and it not just because of my lifestyle, but because this is my attitude for the world. Is when I'm out in nature, I make sure consciously to not be cynical, to not be worried about things, to be full in the experience, to literally smell the flowers and stop to look at the butterflies and the birds, and then make it a mindful experience. And then awe ensues out of that. Every now and then, you just come across something that's majestic and inspiring and immense. Some feats of light, especially out here in the desert. We get these incredible storms where we have this incredible geography, these huge cliffs and deep canyons. So moments of awe are not a rarity for me, and I deliberately
Nice.
try to open myself to them. So it's hard for me to say there's one moment I can tell you.
Yeah, just
Last
pick one.
week last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was standing on the edge of that mesa and a storm was coming in and I hunkered down and the lightning and thunder and then the rainbows came out but it's not a rare experience. I've had countless like this
Yeah.
and I consider myself very fortunate.
I think you touch on a really good point there is that the more you do go out and experience the world, the more
Mhm.
opportunities you have for those more inspiring experiences.
Yes, but the other part of it is that don't just assume that being out of the world is a magic formula. You have to condition yourself. You have to come into the experience with the right attitude.
Absolutely.
Being able to leave some of the mundane concerns, some of the cynicism, some of that behind, and really allow yourself to be open to these experiences, not just to big, immense things, but every little detail. There's just so much beauty and intricacy and complexity out there that is just fascinating if you take the time to really immerse yourself in it. But you have to put in your share, and nature is not going to force you into it.
Absolutely. What role do you think solitude plays in your work? Do you prefer being alone in the field or just sharing the
I only
experience?
work alone.
Okay.
I only work alone 100%. And I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say this is a rule. It's just, that's the kind of person that I am. I'm very
Yeah.
reclusive. I live by myself. Most days, I don't even have a reason to go to town unless I need to go to the store to get groceries or the post
Sure.
office or something like that. So I live in a small house on a dirt road. I only have one neighbor up the road from me, so nobody other than him, who's a single retired person, drives in front of my house. I'm just alone vast majority of the time, and I love it. And I know this is not how most people are wired, but that's how I am, and so for me, it absolutely it's I would say it's a necessity for any kind of meaningful experience.
Okay. No, I'm fascinated by different people's experiences. Many people like going out in groups. Other people, they have to be alone to be able to create. And I think it's really important that you find something that you're comfortable with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some people
If
are
you're not comfortable
compulsively
being
there.
alone, then don't go out alone.
Then don't be alone. Yeah, see, I'm not trying to offer my way of life as a prescription for
Yeah,
any kind
sure.
of success or happiness. It's just, I think the trick is to find a way of life that works for you. And in my latest book, I talk about that is that whole concept of know
Mm,
thyself also means based on your shaping your life based on your personality, on who you are, and who you are is not like other people. You have different personality traits, different preferences, different
absolutely.
beliefs, different tastes. And so shape your life to fit those in the most rewarding way to the degree that you can. And my way is not necessarily the right way for everyone. In fact, it's probably will make most people very miserable to be alone all the time or to be out in nature and sleep in tents and then cook your own meal constantly. And it's just, but for me, that's what I love to do. And it's my personality.
Yeah. And I think finding that way of life that suits you and your personality is vital in having a fulfilling life.
No doubt. You only get the one. So
That's
may
it.
well make it
You've got to make the
good.
most of what you've got. Sounds to me like you very rarely hit creative walls or have those times where you struggle to find inspiration. Do you have
Well,
those times?
absolutely, I do. And I think that's inevitable. I think that's just the nature of creativity. You get very prolonged dry spells every now and then. I think part of the challenge that people who pretty much bet their livelihoods on creativity, that's part of the challenge is finding a way to get through those dry spells, through those blocks, which I believe are inevitable. Can't completely eliminate them. And yeah, when it happens to you early on, you're very concerned. Like, what if it doesn't come back? What if I've peaked? What if it's not going to happen again? What if I have to do something by this day to make a sale and it's not, and I'm not getting it? And it can be very disconcerting. But I think after a while, you just recognize the inevitability of it. And more important, you recognize the importance of what's known in creative research as incubation. If you read about creative processes, they include this incubation part, and it's a very misunderstood part. The incubation part of the creative process is completely subconscious. In fact, the person that documented first, his name was Graham Wallace, he explicitly said in his book that during the incubation period, you should go out of your way to not think about what you're trying to accomplish, to distract yourself and do whatever you have to do that is not the thing that you're working on, to give those subconscious processes the time that they need to mature, to get to this moment of illumination. And so you recognize that. And so for me, when I go out, I don't challenge myself to make a photograph. I know that the photographs will come when they need to come because they always have. So you learn to trust yourself. You learn to bet on yourself. And so when I go out, sometimes I go to think or to enjoy or to explore some canyon that I haven't seen before. And if I don't come back with a photograph, that's fine. Photographs will come and enough of them will come. I know this because I've been doing this a long time. I just know how it works. But getting to the point where you can say, yeah, in hindsight, I can see that I really shouldn't have worried about it that much. That's a hard threshold to cross.
Yeah. I think it is hard when you're in that state of mind where nothing's coming to you, you're looking around and you're kind of going, I'm not even pulling the camera out of the bag, and there's rainbows and unicorns and whatever flying around your head. And you're sitting there looking at it going, nah, that's not what I want.
And
It is
especially
really,
if your time is limited, yeah, and you
absolutely.
get a week off from work, and I want to go to the spectacular place, and I got to come back with these great photographs, and it's just not happening, and that can be very frustrating. But at the end of the day, it comes down to attitude. If you're going to a spectacular place for a week, whether or not you get photographed should not be the measure of whether it was
That's
worth
exactly it.
the experience of being there, seeing something amazing, experiencing something amazing. Focus on that, and photographs will come sometimes or
Absolutely.
not, and but it would still be a worthwhile experience.
I think that's fantastic advice. Speaking of advice, what's the best and or worst advice that you've ever got?
Oh boy. I got a lot of worst advices. I don't know about best advice. Yeah, I don't know. I recall at some point that I became very fascinated with studying the history of photography and the writings of great photographers. And I think what has made a big shift in my own life was reading the daybooks of Edward Weston. Not so much for any piece of advice that he gave, which he does, is some really good advice, but for the way that he lived, which I
Yeah.
know a lot of people will have very judgmental things to say about how he lived, but his attitude was that opportunity presents itself and he would go.
Yep.
He wouldn't get a job, quit a job. He'll go to the market and find a fascinating vegetable, and he's going to spend the next however long photographing vegetables. And he doesn't know if he's going to sell anything, and he doesn't know if anybody would like it. It's just it caught his attention. That's what he wanted to
Yeah.
do. Got an opportunity to go to Mexico. Sure, I'll go to Mexico. Got an opportunity, got a Guggenheim grant to go photograph in Death Valley. Sure, I'll go to Death Valley, find something to do there. And he was just constantly moving around, trying, experimenting with new things. And he was an incredible artist. And for me, that's very much mimics my personality, where I'm not obsessed with safety and security and plans and
Yeah.
predictability. It's just I like the challenge. I like the changes. I get bored with things when they become too predictable, too repetitive. So
I think those societal norms, like I've got to have a steady job, steady income, et cetera, do hold back a number of people from achieving their creative potential. I'm not saying that it doesn't make them worse photographers or better photographers for either limiting their time or extending their time, but I think those sorts of things do sometimes hold people back. Do you agree with that or not?
I do, and I hope I don't overstep. I'll try to keep this very politically correct. But as someone who strives to lead by example, that's just something that I feel is important to let people know is don't commit to a life too early. And then I think I see people in their early 20s and they already have started a family and then have a mortgage and have already started down a very demanding career path. And they don't even know themselves. They don't even know what kind of
Sure.
life would make them happy. And by the time they do, they already have so many commitments tying them down that they end up adapting themselves instead of when they had the opportunity, just wait to see and adapt life to their own personality, their own desires, their own goals in life. And yeah, that's not something that is easy to offer as advice. I can't tell someone, yeah, just drop your life right now and go do something else. It's
It's
not
not
really
practical
useful
for
advice
everyone. I agree.
for most people. But to the degree that you have choice, to the degree that you have control, to the degree that even with some risk, even with some discomfort, you might get yourself on a track to a much, much more satisfying life. To me, it was always worth it to take that chance. It didn't always pan out, but looking in hindsight now in nearly 60 years of life, I'm glad that I took those chances.
Yeah, nice. I'd like to touch a little bit on the practice of editing and how that has both evolved in your career, but also in how you go about it now that you've got to a point where you're, as you said, I'll use your words, semi-retired. Were you always one to sit back and let things marinate before you actually get into editing, or were you one to get into things and edit as soon as you got back from a shoot?
I do, but I want to explain the reason that I do is I think of editing as another opportunity for a creative experience. And
Absolutely.
but it's not just something you say as soon as I'm done photographing and I come home within the next 3 days, I got to set up time for editing. No, you get to a point where it's just, okay, today feels like a great day for editing.
Uh-huh.
Whatever, make some good food, pour myself a drink, put on some nice music, make my environment conducive to it, and just this is what I'm doing today. This is I'm gonna sink my myself and my mind into it, and I'm gonna try and experiment with things. I'm gonna take the time to see where it goes, and I'll spend the day editing work from maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe even go into the archives and dig up things from years ago. But I want it to be a rewarding experience. I don't want it to be a chore. I don't want it to be, oh, I have to process this work because I got to get it out. I have to post it. I have to send it. I have to submit it. That then it becomes not enjoyable to me at all. So I don't want processing to be that for me. But when I feel like, okay, I don't feel like going out today, I'm going to sit here and spend a day or half a day or the next couple of hours processing, then I try to make it a comfortable, enjoyable experience. And again, open myself up to creative experiences, creative possibilities, and see where it takes me. So, yeah, I'm not obsessed with editing things immediately according to any particular schedule. I'm not trying to cut corners. I'm not trying to save time. I'm not trying to use automated tools. I love working with my hands. I love shaping the images and, yeah, just make that the focus of my attention for that period.
Nice. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
Oh boy, again, it's hard to detach that from some of the greater challenges in the world, anywhere from politics, climate, artificial intelligence, all those things are going to affect different people. And if they're photographers, then they're going to have some effect on photography. Yeah, obviously, the whole idea of what being a professional photographer and whether professional photography is even going to be needed in most genres is being threatened now by artificial intelligence. I wouldn't say threatened because for some people it might be an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, as always, the challenge is to stay creative and to find a way to do what you like doing. And sometimes those avenues dry out and you have to find new ways to do things, new ways to experience things. Specifically for my kind of work, where I like to work out in the wild. I like to work alone. I like to work in places that are as naturally, ecologically intact as possible. Those places are disappearing fast, both because of climate change, both and because of increased tourism, and because a lot more people are out there trying to photograph them. A lot of people bring drones and all kinds of other things that change the experience of being there. So to me, that is another great thread. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how you practice your work, why you practice your work, and the change is inevitable, and sometimes change can be very disruptive. It's just the challenge is adapting.
What do you see as the future of photography?
Again, if you're a photographer like me, then the future of photography doesn't change. My point in photography is not necessarily to make the prettiest, most sellable work. My purpose in photography is to enhance my experiences in the outdoors, and those are not going to change in my lifetime. At least they will change at some point, but at least for me, I now live in a place and have a kind of life where I'm going to have wild places to be alone and explore for the rest of my days for sure. And I enjoy practicing photography in a certain way. Then there might be other technologies coming up that will usurp that in a public way and in a professional way. But there's nothing keeping me from practicing photography the way I always have. I don't have to adapt all these new technologies. I don't have to jump into all these new markets. I can keep doing what I'm doing. So for me, there's not going to be very much change. But for people are just entering it, for people who are young, for people who are looking into where photography is going to go, there's going to be so many new and a lot of them unpredictable changes that it's hard to say where photography is going. For certain, AI is going to play a big part of it, if only because because photography is so technology dependent, and the technology companies that enable photographies are all moving in that direction. So photographers might not have a choice. They might get dragged into it whether they want to or not.
It's in your camera now. It's if
in
you've
your
bought
camera
one in
and
the
your
last
processing
5 years,
tools.
it's
Absolutely.
in all your editing software. So
Yeah, and if you want to be a professional, then it's something your competitors use to try to get a leg up too. So as you're kind of
absolutely,
dragged into it, because if you don't do it, then you're going to get beat out. So yeah, there's a lot of changes coming, but I'll be remiss if I didn't say that when people talk about artificial intelligence and I see discussions on photography forums, and that's a very narrow way to think it. AI can be an extremely useful technology too. It's extremely powerful technology. It can be extremely powerful in positive and negative ways, but to say that the challenge of AI is how it will affect photography, that's like saying that a nuclear bomb might interrupt some people's naps. It's AI is going to have such a devastating effect on so many different aspects of life that
absolutely.
photography is probably going to be a footnote there, but it is coming.
I personally think photography is going to be okay because, as you say, those people that, particularly landscape photographers, I think the biggest threat is for people in the marketing and advertising industry, the product
Absolutely.
photographer and fashion photographers, because now a marketing exec can just type a few words and pretty much build his campaign around that, and he doesn't need to hire creatives, which
Correct.
is a shame
But not just
because
photography, music and filmmaking and the
exactly,
white
yeah,
collar professions like accounting and even law and medicine. AI can replace a lot of professionals in those fields too. So it's going to be
absolutely,
pretty devastating for
mm,
good or bad.
yeah. But as the I forget the exact Chinese proverb saying, whatever, with
May you
change
live.
comes opportunity, is
Yeah,
basically,
there's also something it's said to be a Chinese proverb. I don't know if it actually is, where if you want to wish someone harm, you wish for them. May you live in interesting times.
interesting
I think
time.
I think interesting times are coming.
I think they're already,
Oh, no doubt.
I'd like to live in precedented times for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, but back to your question, I think for me, photography is primarily about experience. The experiences. It's a byproduct of experiences that for me are not going away. No technological advances are going to deprive me of being able to go out into nature and to practice photography with my 15-year-old camera the way that I always have. My age, I'm not worried about that not being available to me, but
Yeah.
I think it's something that is definitely will be a concern and definitely will change in ways that are not necessarily predictable for other people.
I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you. What's the best thing about being a photographer?
Again, I can answer for myself. The best thing about a photographer is that I don't have to have a quote unquote real job. And I haven't had to have one in a while. I'm free to work where I want, when I want, in the places that I love most in the world. And it feeds off itself. It never feels like a chore. It never feels like a burden. So for me, that is the best thing about photography. Photography has set me free in a lot of ways. And I'm extremely grateful that it came into my life and did that for me.
Awesome. What about the worst thing? What's the worst thing about being a photographer?
Uh, Again, that depends on how you practice photography. The way that I practice photography, there is no worst thing. If I don't feel like photographing, I don't have to photograph. So whatever the worst thing it can do, I can just turn it off and not have it. It's hard for me to think of a worst part of photography.
What do you like to do when you're not out shooting?
Oh boy, I have a very diverse list of interests. I love reading. I read a lot. I'm very interested in science, art, music, ecology, psychology, physics, mathematics, philosophy. I just have a very hungry brain. I just constantly have to
Hmm.
feed it with something. Yeah, I love to cook. I love to hike. I love to play with animals. I love a lot of different things that I love doing.
Awesome. I've only got two more questions for you. First off, I'd like to know if there's any other photographers you think I should be talking to on the podcast.
Absolutely. I have two close friends who are very much aligned philosophically with me, even though they do very different things, which I think would make them interesting guests. One is my close friend Michael Gordon. He's
Uh-huh.
my teaching partner when I used to teach workshops. He does very interesting work in a similar way that I'm emotionally bound to this geography of the Utah Canyon country. He has a very similar and maybe even deeper connection with the Mojave Desert, with the deserts of California and the state of California, so he can speak to those, and he does very creative work, beautiful, a lot of it black and white, very moody photography of desert photographs. And he has a very interesting life philosophy too. So I think he would make a great guest. And the other is my other good friend, Colleen Minnick. She's similar like me, has a very existentialist oriented sense of how to live life. She calls it living the big life. And yeah, she's a great teacher, great educator, very high energy, bubbly person, which is not at all like me. So I think that would make her an interesting person, similar philosophy, different personality.
Nice. All right. Thank you for those. My last question is one that I've been asking since the beginning of the podcast, and it's been interesting seeing the different attitudes people have to this. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
I don't. I don't have a problem with it. Actually, I might shock your listeners. I like avocado on my pizza.
Okay, interesting. I have seen that. I haven't actually experienced it, but I have seen it, and it's probably not a bad addition.
Hey, it's your food, have it your way. No
That's
matter what anybody thinks. So
that's exactly the right attitude. It's been really wonderful talking to you, Guy. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for taking the time. I really appreciate you sharing your vast experience and knowledge with us. Where can people
Thank you
find
very
your
much.
work?
My website, guytal.com, it's the gateway to everything I do photographically, my photographs, my books, my blog. Yep, that's where you find me.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Guy.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnephotography.com. Along with prints, photography gear, I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've got a field story of your own, I'm really interested to hear it, so drop it in the comments below. Thanks very much. I'm Grant Swinburne, and I hope to see you out shooting soon.